All right, we're going to get started because I've filled up this time pretty well. I'm going to start by saying that. I'm going to throw in the closed captioning actually. There we go. I'm going to start by saying that most of the graphics in this presentation are decorative. If there's a graphic that isn't, like some charts that are in there, I will describe what's in those charts. For folks that might be watching this video, on video later, I'm a middle-aged white man. I've got gray hair, and I'm wearing black glasses. So, welcome to the Neurodivergency SuperPower. Thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. I'm sure everybody's feeling a little draggy from last night. So seeing people at every table here is really great. So thank you very much. We're going to be talking about the challenges of the neurodiverse workforce and what they face, but also what the strengths that they bring. I've been part of the Drupal community since 2006. I attended my first DrupalCon in 2007. I'm one of the founders for Drupal Camp Colorado, and I sat on the Drupal Association Board of Directors for about 2.5 years. I helped found the event organizers working group, and I'm one of the founders and currently the chair for Drupal Colorado, which is the nonprofit that runs Drupal Camp Colorado. I currently work fractionally through my consultancy with a variety of different groups, including the Blue Fly Collective, as an advisor, Next for Autism, as a mentor, advisor, curriculum editor, and TechSoup's Quad program. Before leaving Pfizer earlier this year, I helped found the Neurodiversity Colleague Community Group, and I was the co-host for a podcast focused on neurodiversity called The Rabbit Hole. And I also have a YouTube channel called My Neurodivergent Brain. I'm personally neurodivergent. I am on the spectrum. I have ADHD, and I'm dyslexic. I've known since I was very small that I was different, but back then we didn't call it neurodivergence. We called it learning disabilities. And people like me were considered disabled enough to have accommodations through the Canadian government where I lived at the time. In 2019, I started my own public journey as being an advocate for neurodivergent people by presenting at DrupalCon Amsterdam. And that session told my story of being a neurodivergent person navigating a neurotypical world. At that point, I'd spent quite a lot of time exploring neurodiversity because of my daughter's own challenges. I adopted her from social services when she was 5 years old, and she came with a lot of trauma and a lot of difficulties. So I went to classes and seminars because I needed to know as much as I could about her so I could be her advocate. And when I did this research, what happened was light bulb after light bulb went off in my head as I started realizing all kinds of things about myself. And if it hadn't been for my daughter, I would have just continued barely coping. I never would have really understood my own ADHD, my dyslexia, and I certainly wouldn't have come to the explosive realization that I was on the spectrum. In Amsterdam, I did a presentation called Pivot Points, and in that talk, I talked about my journey to becoming a technology leader despite these challenges. Since then, I've done a second talk called My Neurodivergent Brain. I gave the first version of that talk in Portland in 2019, and the most recent version of it a few weeks ago in Orlando. That talk highlights my lived experience as a neurodivergent person, but it also had all kinds of tips and tricks and the importance of universal design. And both those talks were heavily focused on my own personal experiences, including the isolation and misunderstanding that neurodivergent people often feel. But this talk is different. This talk is about the business imperative of creating neuro-inclusive teams in the 21st century. These 4 authors have been very important to me, and their 3 books have been super important to my research. If you're interested in this topic, I really recommend you purchase them and read them. The 4 authors are Dr. Praslova, Dr. Maureen Dunn, Dr. Nancy Doyle, and Professor Almuth McDowell. So the first thing that we need to talk about is what is neurodiversity or neurodivergence? Harvard Health Publishing's definition is neurodiversity describes the idea that people experience and interact with the world around them in many different ways. There's no one right way of thinking, learning, and behaving, and differences are not viewed as deficits. So when we talk about a spectrum, What we're really talking about is the vast variety of ways that we are. In fact, teams with a mix of neurodiverse and neurotypical people tend to be the most highly functioning teams. So when I talk about these differences, I'll typically approach them from a strengths-based lens rather than focus on deficits. And each of these differences brings a host of strengths. For example, those on the autism spectrum are often known for concentration, fine detail process, and topical obsessions. People with ADHD are often able to hyperfocus, are creative and authentic. And dyslexics are visual thinkers, and they're often very creative as well. So on and so forth. And this is usually described as spiky profiles. And we'll talk more about spiky profiles a little later in the talk. What I'd like you to do now is just pull out your devices. I've got a QR code here. This is an activity that I call Who Amongst Us? It's entirely anonymous, so don't worry about outing yourself or anything like that. And what I'd like you to do is fill out a one-question survey. It's a one-topic survey that asks, and I want you to put into it the thing that is closest to you. So are you neurodivergent? Do you have a neurodivergent family member? Do you have a neurodivergent friend? Do you work with somebody who's neurodivergent? Or you're not sure or don't know anyone? Except obviously me. Let's not skew the survey here, okay? All right. So let's see if this works. All right, awesome. All right, so check it out. When we look at this, the vast majority of us are already part of this community. You're already connected to this community in one way or another. So what I'd like you all to be thinking about throughout this session and after the session is, what if this was me, my sibling, my spouse, my parent, my cousin, my friend? What would I want for them? 15 to 20% of the population is estimated to be neurodiverse in some way. The CDC reports that nearly 1 in 36 children are diagnosed with autism. And an analysis from Empathizer on software engineers reported a 400% higher prevalence than the general public. Likewise, the CDC reports that 9.8% of children are diagnosed with ADHD, and up to 20% have dyslexia. So overall, this means that the prevalence of neurodivergence hovers at about 20% of our population. What this means is that up to 1 in 5 people you may meet may be living in a world that's defined by systemic exclusion from opportunities to reach their full potential in our society. Imagine for a moment what that must feel like. You know, I can share a little bit of my lived experience. Grades 7 and 8, I was in an attempt to sort out my learning difficulties, but also cater to the fact that I was bright. I ended up being enrolled in both the Gifted and Talented program and the remedial program at the same time. And practically speaking, what that meant was I didn't fit in anywhere. The Gifted and Talented program folks were like, well, he's in the remedial program. And the remedial folks were, well, he's in the Brainiac program. And the regular kids really didn't have anything to do with anybody in either of those programs. So it was an extremely lonely time for me, and I found myself being bullied a lot of the time. And that exclusion, though, didn't end after the playground or after high school or after finishing university, because it's endemic to the way our system is set up. And this isn't a criticism of the system. It's more like neglect. It just hasn't been thought about. All right, we're going to do a pivot here. Who can tell me right now, real quick, what's the unemployment rate in the United States? Just somebody call it out. 4.5%. 4.5%? 3.5%? Okay. All right. So yeah, it's hovering between 3 and 4.2% at this point. And for people who are disabled, however, and when I talk about disabled, I'm talking about cognitive, physical, like blindness, deafness, paraplegics, of all working adults, that jumps to 7.2%. However, when you look at college graduates who are neurodivergent, 30 to 40% of them are under or unemployed. And when you talk about people who are on the autism spectrum, that jumps to 85%. Why do you think this is? Like, is it because neurodiverse people are inherently less talented? Is it because they're lazy? They have a terrible work ethic? Our social infrastructure of customs, habits, institutional protocols, and technologies creates a society that can be hostile to people who are autistic, ADDers, dyslexic, dyspraxic, synesthetes, hyperlexic, dyscalculics, and Tourette's, and a host of other cognitive differences. It can make it difficult for them to find meaningful work, and when they do get that work, really hard to keep. Simple things like lighting, noise, crowds, these can all feel hostile. So imagine these fluorescent lights that we've got up here. The quiet buzzing that they make is just the right tone to put you on edge. The light kind of hurts you. The flickering is terrible. And then imagine you're in an open concept office, and every conversation going on around you distracts you and leads to a lack of focus. The noise starts to become overwhelming. And this overstimulation can feel like hundreds of people talking to you all at the same time. And imagine that you can't escape it. You feel trapped. Simple things can feel that way. Now, think about that. And then imagine what happens when you start to add complex social interactions, unspoken rules that can vary depending on context, and the pressures to perform on the spot when you might process stimulation differently than other people. Show of hands, how many of you have experienced that kind of thing? Yeah, right, it's terrible. So no wonder 40% of us are unemployed, and no wonder such a huge percentage of folks on the spectrum are left out. So, why is it hard to find a job? We're going to dissect this for a little bit, but part of it is that traditional hiring practices are biased. Many companies use rigid application processes that prioritize social skills, eye contact, conventional communication over actual job performance. Unstructured interviews favor charisma, quick thinking over skills and work ethic. Applicant tracking systems screen out neurodivergent applicants due to non-traditional resumes and gaps in employment history. And they don't have the empathy to even see the person for who they are. So if you're, for example, a highly skilled autistic programmer, but your social skills are differently developed, you may struggle in an interview due to anxiety or difficulty with small talk, even though you might excel at that job. Dr. Preslova writes, current hiring practices often rely on style over substance. Style-based hiring presents barriers for many neurodivergent job seekers and leads to shockingly high levels of unemployment. But even after you get past the ATS, if the interviewer fears you won't fit in, you probably won't make it to the next round of interviews. Dr. Doyle sums up the challenge perfectly with this picture. So we got a monkey, a giraffe, a fish, a flamingo, an elephant, and a lion, and they're all hoping to be chosen as the best animal in the animal kingdom. And they're told, to ensure fairness, they'll all be given the same test. This seems all right on the surface, right? They're asked, please climb this tree. Now, while the test might be equally administered to all the animals, it isn't equitable in assessing the value of each of these animals. So a fish can't climb, but it can breathe underwater. A flamingo can fly, but lacks the forearms to climb. A giraffe can reach the leaves at the top of the tree without climbing, and the elephant could probably just push the tree over. And finally, the lion could just simply make a meal out of all the other animals. Now, this isn't inherently disabling, though, right? It's not inherently disabling to have spiky profiles like any of these animals. But the test didn't take that into account. It isn't equitable. Many neurodivergent people struggle with self-promotion and networking, which are critical to career advancement. Literal thinking and difficulty with abstract questions can make answering vague or hypothetical interview questions challenging. Dr. Preslova writes, many autistic individuals have high levels of educational attainment and skills and are more than capable of performing the work. However, few excel at making small talk with strangers. However, being hired for most of these jobs requires an interview. Neuronormative small talk expectations in the interview subject autistic applicants to style over substance negative judgments by evaluators, and they quickly and largely outside of their awareness, and then they're justified by the poor fit statement. So I want you to think about being somebody who's on the autism spectrum. You do best when you have direct, concrete communication. You think very literally. Then the interviewer asks, where do you see yourself in 5 years? So the person on the spectrum immediately thinks, okay, location, where am I going to be in 5 years? Today is Wednesday, March 26th in the morning. In 5 years, that'll be a Tuesday. I always go swimming on Tuesdays. I'll be at the pool, right? So if the interviewer were to ask instead, what career path would you like to follow? And what would be the ideal outcome in 5 years? They would get a far different answer. There are significant hiring biases and employer misconceptions about folks like us. Employers may assume that neurodivergent people lack soft skills, leadership ability, or adaptability. Some fear that accommodations will be costly, even though most cost nothing or are very inexpensive. Stereotypes about autism and ADHD can lead to misunderstandings about competency and work ethic. In thinking about leadership and how neurodiverse people often fail to be hired and promoted into leadership roles, Dr. Preslova notes from interviewing professionals in her research that in general, the stereotype that neurodivergent people are only a fit for entry-level jobs denies the tremendous range of their abilities and talents. Then when managers were asked about neurodiverse people generally in the abstract, the observation was, few wanted to know how to be better peers or allies. But then when they were prompted about the fit for leadership roles, nobody ever wondered how best to support a neurodivergent leader. Okay, so you're a dyslexic applicant, all right? You need extra time to read or engage in written tasks, and that's picked up in the interview, right? But what isn't seen is that you can literally see a database in 3 dimensions in your mind, and given the chance, you can get that out onto a Miro board in ways that can make a project become completely crystal clear. But you're overlooked because your spelling sucks. Given a little extra time, though, that could be fixed, but you aren't afforded it. Now, okay, you finally have a job. You've gotten through all of this, right? You finally have a job. There are challenges to keep that job at this point. So remember earlier we talked about sensory and environmental barriers, that many workplaces are overwhelming due to fluorescent lights, noise, open office layouts. All of this can be overloading, overwhelming. They can be crippling. And rigid 9-to-5 schedules and inflexible expectations don't account for different energy levels, focus patterns, and work styles. The Gifts of Imperfection is a self-help book by Dr. Brené Brown, a research professor known for her work on vulnerability, courage, shame, and authenticity. And she writes, fitting in is about assessing a situation and becoming who you need to be accepted. Belonging, on the other hand, doesn't require us to change who we are. It requires us to be who we are. Traditional work environments don't support us to be who we are. So imagine you're an employee with ADHD. You force yourself to work in the office from 8 till noon with a 15-minute break, and then from 1 till 5 with another 15-minute break. Your mind wanders, distractions in the office, like noise from your peers, takes you off task. You're working on a big spreadsheet, and then you hear someone say something about their German Shepherd's agility class over the weekend. Now you're wondering, how would my dog do in agility? I bet you Cassie would be great. She's eager to please and smart. Oh, and boom, your productivity has tanked. But imagine you're in your home office. You're far more productive working in short, intense bursts rather than sitting for 8 hours straight in an open plan office. You do your best when you can get up and sing for no reason. You get the most done when you can work for 20-minute chunks and then stop and throw a ball against the wall. You like starting early and ending late with lots of breaks in between. but none of this is conducive to return to office protocols. Many neurodivergent workers don't disclose their condition out of fear of stigma and discrimination. And supervisors may not provide clear expectations or structured feedback, which neurodivergent employees often need to succeed. Workplace accommodations such as written instructions, flexible hours, or noise-canceling headphones are often overlooked or worse, denied. Wikipedia shares autistic individuals often face significant barriers in accessing appropriate support and accommodations, leading to feelings of isolation and misunderstanding. And we all want psychologically safe places to work, but all too often we're not given reason to trust that. If you're a dyslexic employee, you might struggle with fast-paced email communication, but you excel in problem solving and big picture thinking, yet you receive no accommodations. You're expected to fit into the model or the pattern that doesn't work well with the way that you work. We've all seen this graphic by Angus McGuire, and I think it perfectly sums up the idea of accommodations and what can make a difference, what equity really looks like. Workplace culture and social expectations are tough, and they're confusing. Unspoken rules, office politics, networking pressure can be exhausting, confusing. Executive dysfunction, common with people with autism and ADHD, can make time management, prioritization, and deadline tracking a little more challenging. And masking, that's the hiding of neurodivergent traits to fit in, can lead to burnout and anxiety. Dr. Dunn writes, neurodivergent people often engage in an arduous process of fitting in, also known as masking, where enormous amounts of energy are expended through superficial impression management and deeply felt stress to hide those neurodivergent traits. So if you're an autistic employee, you may like people quite a lot. I like people a lot. But you don't understand small talk. You have deep interests that you love to share, but all too often no one to share them with. This means you don't participate in the small talk. After-work social events increase your stress because of all the noise and the chaos of being at a restaurant or a bar. And even when you do go, you can't process all the conversations quickly enough because you can't just focus on one person because of all of the extraneous noise. So you're not seen as a team player, despite contributions you make to the company. And even though you're loyal and hardworking, you really aren't understood. And this can lead to resignations or worse, layoffs. So I want you to take, for a moment, I want to take a moment to talk about these deep interests for a second, and how they play into the autistic mind. So I'm going to share a little bit about myself. First off, it's important to know that autistic people often show affection by sharing their special interests with others, and they'll explain these passions in great detail. And they'll often invite those they care about to participate in the activities. So if you've got a friend who's bubbling over with excitement and sharing something with you that's really esoteric, it simply could be that they really like you and they want you to experience the joy that they're having. For example, I am certified as a master scuba diver. My scuba diving has bordered on an obsession. I feel joy when I'm underwater, when the pressure of the water starts pressing in my body. Every 15 feet, you get another atmosphere of pressure. And it's like having a giant weight blanket all over my body. And then there's the silence of being down there. All you hear is the inhaling and exhaling through your regulator. And then there's a common sign language used by every diver in the world. They all talk underwater the exact same way. So there's no question about what they're saying to you and what they want and what they need. So when I'm engaged in small talk, I'm almost certainly going to bring up diving. And in fact, at Florida Drupal Camp, it turned out that there was another diver in one of my talks. Can you guess what the two of us talked about at the social event after the camp, right? And in fact, I've set up a little DrupalCon dive at the Georgia Aquarium tomorrow. So there are a couple of us that are going to go to the aquarium and jump in with the whale sharks. So when I'm talking to you about diving, or dogs, or cooking, or Drupal, I'm talking to you from a place of affection. Okay, so I can sort of hear people saying in their minds, this seems like a lot of trouble, more like a super weakness than a superpower. But what we're going to do now is we're going to talk about babies and the elderly for a hot minute, okay? So here's the thing. Gen Xers and baby boomers are retiring. We're living a lot longer, and we're healthy into our old age. And these numbers are really important when we play into the next chapter of this narrative. All right, so there's a graphic here that shows birth rates going up, and retirements going up and birth rates going down. All right, it's becoming critical that we rethink our workforce and how that fits into the neurodivergency superpower. Our population demographics are becoming our enemy. We're having fewer babies than people retiring, and this is creating a workforce gap. The warning signs are clear: fewer births, more retirees. We haven't felt the full weight of what this means to our economies and societies yet, but we can get a glimpse of it in Japan. We can see this manifesting already. The age dependency ratio, which compares the number of elderly individuals to those of working age, was 40% in 2014. That's expected to increase to nearly 80% by 2060. This shift indicates that fewer workers will be supporting more retirees, intensifying the strain on social support systems. So remember earlier how we talked about the fact that 40% of neurodiverse people are unemployed or underemployed. Well, this exacerbates the situation, as most of these people also rely on social support systems. But here's the thing: given the chance, they might not need to. They're often not just capable, but exceptional. So we're reaching a crisis. And I know with all the layoffs that we've been seeing in our industry lately, it doesn't feel like that, but a reckoning is coming, and it's probably sooner than later. So there are a few strategies that countries like the Western countries like the US can engage in to mitigate this coming storm. Western countries can do things like increase immigration. Well, I'm not sure how that's going to play out at this point, but you could do that. We can delay retirements and force people to work longer before getting benefits. We can invest in AI and automation to make people more efficient. We can encourage our population to have more children. All right, so there's maybe a mix of some of these, maybe not, in the solution. But one of the perhaps most effective ways to quickly fill that part of that gap is to just create neuro-inclusive environments where it's easier for neurodivergent people to get hired and to be retained. Neuro-inclusivity isn't just the right thing to do, it has implications on the bottom line for companies, and that just hasn't been tapped yet. Dr. Dunn cites a study by JP Morgan that autistic employees were found to be 48% faster and up to 140% more productive at a range of tasks when compared to their neurotypical peers employed in the same position. So when you consider our declining fertility and our increasing retirement rates, what we see is this tightening workforce. But we also have the opportunity to leverage an underutilized but extraordinarily efficient workforce, a workforce that has been chronically excluded from the economy. They can be unlocked through the principles of universal design and authentic inclusion. Okay, we're going to talk about the spiky profiles. I've told you that we would talk about them, so we will. And I think it's really important that employees and employers alike are trained on this concept so they can understand how neurodiversity results also in spiky skills. The term spiky profile was coined by David Grant in 2009 in a book called Neurodiversity in Higher Education and popularized by Professor Amanda Kirby. And it relates to all people. You'll see that in just a second, but particularly those with neurodivergence. So the term spiky profile refers to a cognitive pattern where an individual exhibits significant strengths in certain areas alongside notable challenges in others. This concept is often associated with neurodivergent conditions such as autism and ADHD, where individuals may display exceptional abilities in specific domains while facing difficulties in others. So imagine that we've got this group of people, these three people: Robert, Jennifer, and David. Jennifer falls within the neurotypical range when you look at her cognitive profile. Robert and David both have neurodivergent profiles. So remember at the beginning of the talk, we talked about what the quote from Harvard, that neurodiversity describes the idea that people experience and interact with the world around them in many different ways. There's no one right way of thinking, learning, and behaving. So think about that. Take it to heart while we go through this next section. Because just like superheroes, neurodivergent people who have great strengths are often balanced by great weaknesses. So we're going to start with a mean. Okay, we've got this chart here. This is a simple average of all neuronormative people. It shows all kinds of different competencies that are often measured when people are assessed for cognitive differences. Those are down on the bottom on the x-axis. And then the skill level is represented on the y-axis on a scale of 0 to 10, where 0 is incapable and 10 is the best possible. So right now we're showing on this chart, 5 is the mean for neurotypical people. That said, that's not the way people are built, right? Everybody has some spikiness. So this chart shows Jennifer's neurotypical profile. All of her scores fall within a typical range, represented by the yellow band. Her profile is a bit spiky and shows that she's better at some things than others, but all fall within the normal range. When measuring a neurodivergent person, though, these spikes become much more pronounced. So Robert and David show much more pronounced spiky profiles. Some attributes fall within the neurotypical range, but others are outside the normal range, both high and low. And this is a very common pattern for neurodivergent people. And this is where we start to get the hint of the superpower. Each of these men on their own might be unsuccessful. Robert's terrible at multitasking and at persuasion and presentation. David cracks quickly under pressure and has difficulty processing requests. But each of them is excellent at other things like pattern recognition, time management, logic and reason, mathematics, reading comprehension, creativity. But watch what happens when you put David, Jennifer, and Robert into the same team. Something special starts to emerge. Suddenly, you have a group whose cognitive talents complement one another, and the team has many attributes between 6 and 10. Their weaknesses are blunted by the collective strengths. If you were to only mix neurotypicals together, you might have a team that maxes out at 6 or 7. But there's more to it than just improving a team's overall cognitive profile. Because you see, any diverse team, doesn't matter whether it's neurodiversity or other kinds of diversity, they are inherently better. Diversity hedges against groupthink. That's an economic advantage. And even not taking into account the advantage that neurodivergent spiky profiles bring, just having traditional diversity in your teams improves outcomes. Dr. Dunn explains this with companies with more diverse management teams demonstrate on average 19% higher revenues due to increased innovation and 9% higher margins. Okay, so I just mentioned groupthink. How many of you have heard of groupthink? Put up your hand. All right. Does somebody here want to take a quick shot at defining it?
An average of thought, so everybody kind of comes to the same conclusion because there's no, right or left, just
Yeah.
average.
Yeah, did everybody hear that? Yeah. Okay, that's pretty darn close. My favorite definition, I've read quite a few, was written by Dr. Dunn. But the whole notion of groupthink was brought up in 1972 by a social psychologist named Irving Janis. Janis's seminal work on groupthink analyzed historical policy fiascos, such as the Bay of Pigs and the escalation in Vietnam. And Dr. Irving, his exploration of this illustrated how group cohesion can lead to poor decision making. So, like I said, Dr. Dunn has a really good and kind of wordy, but a really good definition, and it's a level of homogeneity of thought that crosses some theoretical threshold where individual reasoning becomes subordinate to some emerging consensus within the group, resulting in a decision-making outcome that is driven by factors including social dynamics unrelated to an objective and rational evaluation of information relevant to making the most effective decision. Groupthink thrives in environments where there's pressure to agree, dissenting views are discouraged or seen as disloyal. The groups are typically highly cohesive. Everyone values unity over independent thought. Often, a strong leader dominates. The leader's opinion overshadows others. And there's often time pressure, so the group is rushing to make decisions instead of carefully considering options. And there's a fear of conflict, so people self-censor to avoid tension or rejection. In other words, the homogeneity becomes the primary concern. Fitting in is the most important factor, and people are rushed into making decisions. And this is, in fact, really, really bad. It gives the illusion of invulnerability where the group believes that they're too smart or powerful to fail. You can end up with collective rationalization where warning signs are dismissed instead of critically analyzed. Teams end up stereotyping outsiders, and the group sees critics as the enemy instead of valuing their input. And all of this, like I said before, leads to self-censorship, where members withhold dissenting opinions to avoid rocking the boat. There's the pressure to conform, and those who challenge the group are pressured to fall into line. All of this creates the illusion of unity, and silence is mistaken for agreement, reinforcing the false belief that everyone agrees. Groupthink can lead to disastrous outcomes as people lack the courage to dissent and miss details that would have otherwise been seen. Some examples include the Challenger disaster of 1986. The NASA engineers ignored warnings about faulty O-rings because there was a pressure to launch on time. And this led to a catastrophic explosion. And personally, I remember AV cart was rolled into our classroom. We were all watching, and we watched Krista McAuliffe, a high school social science teacher, get blown up with the rest of the crew. 2008 financial crisis. Banks and investment firms ignored warnings about high-risk mortgage practices because of peer pressure and industry norms. And this led to massive economic collapse. The stock market lost 57% of its value. Unemployment soared to 10%, and home values dropped by 30%, with millions of foreclosures. And the U.S. economy shrunk by 4.3%, the worst since World War II. Full stabilization and recovery took until 2017. And then we have the Bay of Pigs invasion. John F. Kennedy's advisors failed to question a poorly planned invasion of Cuba, and this led to a humiliating military defeat. The Bay of Pigs strengthened Castro, it escalated Cold War tensions, and led to the Cuban missile crisis, and it drove Cuba closer to the USSR, with escalating tensions worldwide. And we still feel that effect today. But sometimes groupthink can be entirely snuffed out by just one or two people expressing an alternative path. And that can be enough to do two things: expand the number of paths that could be followed, and encouraging other people to speak up if they have other ideas. This is where the neurodivergent superpower can actually defeat the kryptonite of groupthink. Neurodivergent people's spiky cognitive strengths often process information differently than neurotypical people. They perceive details in different ways, and they can often come to a differing conclusion even with the same data available. According to Dr. Maureen Dunn's writing, she's observed that neurodivergent people tend to be less concerned about social status and more likely to speak up if they're given the chance. Keiji Izuma is a prominent figure in the field of social cognitive neuroscience, and he currently serves as a professor at the School of Economics and Management at Kochi University in Japan. And he conducted this social status study where they asked autistic and neurotypical people to donate to UNICEF on two separate occasions. The first donation request occurred with no social pressure, without anyone knowing what the outcome was going to be. On the second occasion, the participant was watched by the researcher, standing close, and observing every single step. Autistic participants donated the same amount of money both times. However, the neurotypical participants donated significantly more money when they were being watched. And this was tied to the perceived improved social status of making the larger donation. This notion of the importance of social status is one of the key components that drives groupthink. The person cares more about how they're perceived than the outcome of the decision. Bain and Company found in their research that teams make better decisions than individuals 66% of the time. But guess what happens when you deal with a neuro-inclusive team? That jumps to 87% better. And while diversity can increase short-term friction within teams by 15%, that was far outweighed by findings that neuro-inclusion boosts positive results by 60%. And Deloitte found that diversity increases innovation by 20% and reduces risk by 30%. In other words, neuro-inclusive teams make better decisions with better results, including increased innovation, all while reducing risk. Dr. Dunn writes, different kinds of minds working together create much stronger teams than cognitively homogeneous groups. When all kinds of minds are valued and there's strong foundation of trust and psychological safety, the potential for innovation is ripe. Neuro-inclusive teams have greater instances of innovative ideas and breakthroughs. This can add to the bottom line for any organization and increase profits. So I'm going to recap for a second here what we've learned so far, what we've established. We're headed towards a crisis in being able to fill roles for skilled workers due to declines in birth rates and increase in retirements. Back to those babies and grandparents we talked about. Neurodivergent people are chronically under and unemployed, despite often being highly educated and extremely capable. And when we move from homogeneous teams to neuro-inclusive teams, we increase the capability of the overall team's cognitive profile. We also decrease the prevalence of groupthink and increase the prevalence of innovative ideas. And we reduce risk. All right, all good, right? Right? This sounds great. Well, not so fast. Who remembers from the beginning of the talk barriers to become employed or stay employed? Anybody want to throw out just one of them? No?
ATS, the interview process.
Yep.
And emphasis on charisma and social skills.
Exactly. So, exactly right. So, where does this leave us? Well, it leaves us having to figure out how we can create work environments that attract and retain neurodivergent workers. And the really good news about this is things that are good that help people on the spectrum, those with ADHD, people with dyslexia, dyspraxic, synesthetes, hyperlexic folks, dyscalculic folks. The things that we do for them are really, really, really good for neurotypical people too. And they're the foundations for universal design. Universal design is a concept that involves designing products and environments to be usable by as many people as possible, regardless of age, size, ability, or disability. The goal is to maximize usability without the need for specialized design or adaptation. Universal design can be applied to many things, including buildings, services, tools, learning strategies, and physical spaces. It focuses on the equity of design. So how could this manifest for those who are trying to create neuro-inclusive environments? Environments that have psychological safety built in? Well, the first thing that we need to do is understand what psychological safety means. Team members need to feel safe to take risks, ask questions, and express their thoughts without fear of ridicule or punishment. For neuro-inclusive teams, this is even more critical because many neurodivergent individuals have experienced past exclusions, misunderstandings, or negative workplace interactions. By fostering psychological safety, companies unlock creativity, innovation, and productivity while making sure that every team member thrives. So there's 6 categories of things that you can do pretty quickly in your company. The first is foster a culture of respect and understanding. Educate the team on neurodiversity by providing some kind of neurodiversity awareness training so colleagues can understand cognitive differences. Set the expectation of inclusion. Make it clear that all thinking styles are valued, and lead with empathy. Encourage managers and teams to who lead to listen first and seek to understand. If you're the leader on a neuro-inclusive team, make it clear that on this team, we recognize everybody processes information differently. Let's work together and ensure that all those voices are heard. Number 2, encourage open communication and flexible participation. So provide multiple ways to communicate. Some neurodivergent people prefer writing over speaking. Some need extra processing time. Some want to give feedback anonymously. They feel safer that way. So give additional processing time as well. So for example, instead of expecting immediate responses in meetings, allow for time for follow-up via email or chat. So instead of putting someone on the spot like I've been putting you all on the spot, a leader might say, take some time to think about this and share your thoughts in Slack later. Number 3, create a low sensory, flexible work environment. Reduce sensory overload. Offer quiet workspaces, noise-canceling headphones, or remote work options. Respect work preferences. Allow for flexible schedules whenever possible. For example, those with ADHD might work better at certain times. Offer alternative meeting formats. Some neurodivergent people struggle with back-to-back video calls, so you can provide the option of asynchronous updates instead. What I'm asking you to do is help your company create a neuro-inclusive workspace that it offers adjustable lighting, sensory-friendly breakout areas, and I'll tell you this, sensory rooms are good for everyone. Number 4, embrace strengths-based collaboration. So focus on what people do well. Assign tasks based on individual strengths rather than forcing everyone into the same workflow. Allow different ways of thinking and working styles. Some thrive on detailed structures, while others excel with big picture problem solving. Encourage mentorship in a buddy system. So pair neurodivergent employees with other people who are neurotypical, and make it clear that this is a bi-directional sort of mentorship kind of experience where people can learn from one another. Don't force ADHD people into rigid processes. A neuro-inclusive manager allows creativity in problem solving and different ways of approaching tasks. Number 5, model psychological safety as a leader. Normalize mistakes. Show that making mistakes is a part of learning. Encourage questions. Make it clear that no bad questions. There are no bad questions. And reinforce inclusive behaviors. So call out positive team interactions when someone makes an effort to be inclusive. A neuro-inclusive leader will openly say, I didn't consider that perspective. Thank you for bringing that up, to encourage diverse viewpoints. And finally, number 6, implement clear inclusive policies. Provide reasonable accommodations for everybody without stigma. Make it easy for everybody to request accommodations without fear of whether they're neurotypical or neurodivergent. And encourage neurodivergent leadership. Promote or hire neurodivergent employees into decision-making roles. And think about neurodiversity within your DEI strategy. Treat it as a core part of diversity efforts, not as an afterthought. The most successful companies ensure that neurodivergent employees are included in hiring panels and leadership discussions. Putting together a new way of working that considers neuro-inclusivity as a core value won't happen overnight. There are companies that have started doing this kind of work, though, but there's still a long way to go. And the companies that are the first movers will be the ones that thrive in the future. This takes a top-down approach, where companies choose to recruit neurodiverse leaders in the C-suite. This acts as a flag to potential employees that their differences will be valued instead of marginalized. Everything in a company, from hiring practices to promotion to retention to leadership to environment, all of this needs to reflect inclusivity for this change to become part of the culture. But it's worth it. So let me leave you with the following. Neuroinclusive teams are higher functioning. We talked about that earlier. 87% better at decision making, 60% better improvement on OKRs, 20% higher levels of innovation, and risk reduction of 30%. They reduce the prevalence of groupthink. They have that. They can fill the need that we have for a skilled workforce amid the decrease in birth rates and increase in retirements we talked about earlier. And neurodivergent employees who feel psychological safety in their workplaces are fiercely loyal to those companies and have lower rate of leaving. Neuroinclusive environments that promote psychological safety are better working environments for everyone because they employ concepts of universal design. So while on the surface, it may seem that creating neuroinclusive work environments and processes is altruistic, the truth is all of these things factor into better outcomes for companies. They reduce costs, increase productivity, reduce risk, and employ an excluded and underutilized cross-section of the workforce by simply recognizing that neurodiversity is a superpower, and neuroinclusive practices unlock all that potential. Thanks very much. And if you're interested in my YouTube channel, that's where it is. Anybody have any questions? No questions?
Keep that up. Don't take it all away.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Where can you find training for, like, if a company wants to bring in a neurodivergent, like, trainer? Where do you find them?
So I do that kind of work, but there's a great organization called Next for Autism. They're fantastic. I do a little bit of consulting work with them right now. I'm helping them with some of their curriculum, but they do training programs like that as well. If you Google it, you'll find that there are quite a few groups that engage in that kind of work. The three authors that I had at the beginning of the session as well, 4 authors, they all do this kind of training too. In fact, I sat on a panel with one of them a few months ago. So they're out there, and they're not that difficult to find. Yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
And then, like, how do you think a company should disclose that they are neurodivergent friendly?
Say that again.
How do you, like, myself, I happen to be a neurodiverse
Yeah.
individual, and a lot of times my fear of getting out in the world and working
Yeah.
is this going to be a safe environment?
Yep.
So that is not communicated to most people that of mine.
Right. So the question.
So there's this, like, roadblock where we want to, but we're so fearful because we're going to get stuck in a place where we're going to melt down, burn out, and have no safe places.
Yeah. So the question is, what are the signs that a place is going to be have psychological safety and is going to be good for neurodivergent people? So the number one thing that companies can do is have neurodivergent people on their C-suite. So when you're researching the organization, you can see that they've already committed to making those kinds of decisions. But you can also use sites like Glassdoor, for example, or Blind. Blind is another really good social network that is entirely anonymous, where workers are able to talk openly about what their experiences are like, and it's broken down into different kinds of topical areas. So that's what I would suggest: researching the company up front. Yeah. Yeah.
Will you be sharing the slides?
Yeah, I can. I'll share the slides. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I have a question. So I know you had an example where you said, where do you see yourself in 5 years, like in the hiring process, as questions,
Yeah.
and then kind of an adapted question.
Right.
Do you have, like, a resource for kind of how some of those, like, boilerplate questions in the interview process should be asked?
Purchase The Neurodiversity Edge by Maureen Dunn. Any other questions? Yeah.
The whole sequence with the spiky profiles and overlaying them really reminded me of Clifton's strengths, but I also would be suspect that, like, a lot of those existing tools just capture existing biases.
Yeah.
Do you know if any of those are, like, particularly maybe more inclusive or more useful?
So I actually personally, the question is, are there tools out there that are better or worse? I'm just paraphrasing. So personally, I think that the online assessments are mostly bad. If you really want to get a good assessment, you need to go to a psychologist or a psychiatrist and work with them to get a proper assessment. Unfortunately, those tend to be pretty expensive, and they're often not covered by insurance. There are ways to get around that, but those online tools I don't think are that good. You're right; they're biased a lot of the time. Yeah. Anybody else? All right. Well, thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it. I wasn't expecting the room to be full the morning after all those parties, but thank you. I appreciate it.